Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Peterson, and I am the CEO of Sustainable Business Australia. And this afternoon is a punchy counterpoint, one hopes, for the session that occurred just before afternoon tea, which I'm sure if I go out there, I will find no waste, no food waste whatsoever. You have more than served your obligation of ensuring that there is no untoward waste out there of coffee residue, tea bags, or biscuits. Is that correct? Yes, indeed. The question of practice and theory and practice is one that I suspect we're going to have an interesting conversation about for the next hour and a half. What we're going to do this afternoon is slightly unusual in that we are going to have three aspects to this particular session. And the purpose of that is to give you the room and appreciation of, I think, the reality of what circular economy actually means to big business. You've heard earlier in the afternoon the hopes, the aspirations of what practice might be if circular economy were to apply to an economy such as Australia. But what would it take for this particular country of ours to actually embrace? How do you have a country where we are still in the throes of discussing resource efficiency based on a 2009 waste management policy framework document that was only just signed up 2 years ago by COAG? These are challenges, I would suggest to you, when it comes to the notion that the sustainable circular economy is one, much the same as perhaps a decarbonised economy or a low-carbon economy or a zero-waste economy, such as Australia's, could actually have. So the three parts are these. The first is a conversation that we're going to have or hear from one of the practicing companies globally on circular economy, and that is Tarkett, and you're going to hear from the MD of Australasia about that. There's then going to be a commentary aspect to it from overseas. One is an Australian-based person who operates within a global company, and the other comes from a very, very long way away from this country. And they're going to give us some impressions of what business, and dare one say the economies in which they operate in, embrace or not, or the challenges associated with a circular economy. And then third, I thought we'd have the bullshit meter added to it. And that was to get three Australians to sit on a panel and just destroy and decry everything. No. To actually say, but hang on a second, if we're going to be talking about this as a ground-shaping paradigm, what's it going to take where there are significant barriers in this country to embrace a low-carbon economy, let alone a circular one? Or are we in fact talking about the same thing? And if we are, then what are the shapes, the forms, the enablers, the drivers, the barriers, and the potential solutions that perhaps this room could bring forward after the discussion from the No Bullshit Meter panel about how we embrace a circular economy, not just through business, but dare one say, through whole of economy. So, what I thought I'd quickly do, though, is give you a quick sense of who I am and why I'm here and why we're talking about this. Very recently, in fact only a year ago now, SBA became part of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And for those who don't know, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development provided its remit in this country for over 17 years to another business organisation. Does anybody know who it was? Don't put your hand up, Michael Smith or Nicolette Boll. It was the Business Council of Australia. Anybody know what the WBCSD does? Exactly. So for 17 years, we've had the challenge in this country that one of the key activators of business in sustainability has not been prosecuted in this country. Well, that changed last year, and SBA is now delighted to be part and partnership of the WBCSD. And that's the business part of the WBCSD. Over 200 of the Fortune 500 and London Stock Exchange companies are part of the WBCSD. It is significant, and when you do the analysis, as I have done, over 115 of those operate within this country. So it begs the question, if there is international, dare one say, Northern Hemisphere activity going on in these issues, then why aren't we seeing it here? Not that these companies are bad, not that these companies are reluctant to bring it to Australia, but there surely is some lack of driver that is occurring within the Australian business fraternity, because it's not necessarily a community, talking about these issues. And in terms of that network, what's interesting is that for the last almost 10, if not 15 years, there has been a considerable amount of work done on the circular economy, whether you call it that or not, in a number of different sectors. And one of them was, in this particular case, the tyre sector, although they can't spell tyre in my humble opinion, but that's another issue. Ever since January 2006, there has been a project undertaken by the WBCSD with probably the 6 biggest tyre manufacturers in the world, looking at an effective, what we would call in this room, circular economy approach to reuse, recycle and reprocess of tyres. Now, I ask the question, why is it that only in the last year we have seen an effective form of tyre stewardship in this country? It has actually been operating. If you've ever had to buy another set of tyres for your car, you in fact pay a levy. Did you know that? Put your hands up if you did. Right. The rest of the room either doesn't buy tyres, doesn't have a car, or doesn't care. I'd like to think it's not the last one. But the point I'm trying to make here is there is a furious amount of activity going on in certain sectors, and interestingly, across a number of value chains in the progressive side of business. And this is in the area of cement. Again, this piece of work has been undertaken, it's CSI, which is an unfortunate acronym, I appreciate, but this has been undertaken for almost the entire life cycle of the WBCSD, which is almost 25 years, where the work of the cement producers right across 100 countries, not Australia, has actually looked at the life cycle and the management of life cycle of cement. Anybody know about it? No, Michael, put your hand down. We know you know about it. And therein lies the challenge for this country, that there is in fact a substantial amount of work done, either within sector or across certain supply chains, on the issue of circular economy. But what do we know about it here? Well, interestingly, the WBCSD in the last 17 months has introduced what's called Action 2020, which is an agenda to create a much more measurable impact of certain key areas, of which safe and sustainable materials is one of them. And of course, with that, you can find circular economy is included within it. So what the SBA has done, with the support of and now the inclusion of the WBCSD, we have in fact embraced the work program over the next 3 years to look at what the transition of the circular economy might mean to this country in the context of what's going on in the other 65 regions across the world that are part of the WBCSD. And in that regard, there are already 4 solutions that have been purposed, not necessarily well thought of nor well developed, but certainly by the 200 companies that are the WBCSD members, they have said these are the ones that we are focusing on. And what's interesting is only in the last week, this particular work group has pondered the question, is in fact we looking at this particular solution set limiting the opportunity that the circular economy would have in achieving the outcomes that we want to achieve? And they are what's called the societal must-haves, which are, for our purposes, the equivalent of the Millennium Development Goals or the Sustainable Development Goals out to 2030. So we're asking ourselves the question now, is in fact this transition to a circular economy the whole kit and caboodle as opposed to just one pillar? And that's one particular aspect that our members will be looking at in the next few days. So before we do that though, let's hear from a company that's in fact doing it. And what I mean by doing it is, it's in fact embraced as a matter of business strategy and operational outcome, the notion that is the circular economy. And to do that, we have Ralph Jorison. Now, Ralph is the Managing Director of Tarkett Australasia, and he is a recent addition to our fair country, in fact, only having arrived, I think, October, November of last year? So welcome. I hope you had a very warm Christmas. And he was, prior to the managing director of Australasia, the managing director of EMA in the emerging markets for Tarkett. And over the last decade, he has been intrinsically involved in the implementation of key sustainability initiatives, including the cradle-to-cradle methodology as well as circular economy. Today, he is representing DESSO, and SBA is delighted to have announced a few weeks ago that DESSO has become part of the membership of SBA. But in the meantime, Tarkett decided they loved the company so much that they bought DESSO. And so he is here to represent both the interests of Tarkett and also DESSO. So without further ado, can I please welcome Ralph Jorrison.
Thank you, Andrew, for the nice introduction. Going to share you a bit of information today coming from practice. First, I would like to introduce you to DESSO and a little bit of the history. DESSO is an 80-year-old company established in those days in the Netherlands. Was on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange until about 93, when DESSO was acquired by a company called DLW. That later on became Armstrong. That was another acquisition. In 2007, DESSO was purchased by a capital investor called NPM Capital, who until 2010 already started working hard on the cradle-to-cradle approach. Since 2011, DESSO was then purchased by another company called Bensis, another capital investor. The good news is that the whole story about the cradle-to-cradle approach continued. Sometimes those capital investors only have a short-term focus on profitability. Luckily, that was not the case this time. Then in 2015, really beginning of this year, DESSO became part of Tarkett. The fact that DESSO is a cradle-to-cradle company goes well together with the fact that also Tarkett, already since 2008, is working hard on the cradle-to-cradle approach. By then, it was official. Before then, Tarkett already embraced the thoughts of a cradle-to-cradle approach in the way they were operating. But in order to say that you are a cradle-to-cradle company, you really need to embrace the concept and work according to the guidelines. The Tarkett Group is a global leader in flooring with net sales of 2.5 billion euros, 12,000 employees, of which 65 in Australia. These days we do not produce in Australia. You never know, that could change in future. But we are very active in Australia already for well over 30 years. In various categories, Tarkett as a brand is very known in I would say, hospitals, aged care, maybe less in offices and other buildings. And that's why DESSO for us is a great add-on, because they also embrace the cradle-to-cradle approach. And it was for us a very good add-on to all those categories that we offer to the marketplace. It is a coincidence, but last Friday the Tarkett Group released a 74-page report on its activity and sustainability approach. So for those of you who are interested in really recent figures in that respect, at our website of Tarkett you will find a 74 document, really up to date with really nice and interesting information on the cradle-to-cradle and sustainability approach within the Tarkett Group. If we move to the subject, there is quite a number of crises that we are currently facing in the circular economy thinking. We have a climate crisis. Last week, some really good information about what it means if the temperature on the globe goes up by 2%. And in that respect, I think we all have a role to play in ensuring that we get lower carbon emissions. Certainly one of the pillars in a cradle-to-cradle approach for a company like us, using less energy in order to produce. And making sure that in the recycling and reuse of materials, we make good progress. A second item here is the toxicity crisis. One of the aspects here is that urbanization worldwide is one of the big mega trends. Each year there is about 65 million people moving into cities. That's expected to continue in the next 20 to 30 years. That means that each year there is like 6-7 times of Chicago being created, which is serious numbers. It means a lot of people on a fairly small place to live. And that on itself means that indoor air quality is becoming more and more relevant for all of those working and living in indoor spaces. And that is actually meaning that 90% of our time is being spent indoors. An important basis for product development within our company, where we try to make sure that whatever we develop going forward has a minimum of VOCs or even no VOCs or hardly noticeable. The third one is the raw material scarcity. The planet Earth currently caters for 7 billion people. It is expected to increase to 9 billion over the next 30 years. That means that resources are going to become an issue. For those companies who think these days that that is not an issue yet, that issue will come. And the circular economy thinking is vital to ensure availability of resources if you are a company producing. If the USA would consume, if the USA consumption today would be the average on the globe, we would already need 1.5 times the resources available from planet Earth. So luckily the whole world is not yet consuming at the level of the USA. But think if that was the case, we would already have a scarcity on quite a number of raw materials. The fourth crisis is energy. Our reliance on fossil fuels is not only unsustainable in the long term, but it also makes us vulnerable to economic shocks now. Also in that respect, it is vital for companies moving forward to think about alternative solutions. I'm happy to say that DESSO as a company has 25,000 square meters of solar panels on the roof of the plant. And although that is only 5% of the total needs of electricity for that specific plant, it is a start. So those opportunities are there. You just need to put it into practice. And there's not really a lot of companies who are going to put solar panels on the roof when the payback period is only 30 or 35 years. In our thinking, that is something we do. If you look at the circular economy, then there is obviously, and there's a lot of terminology which sometimes is a bit fancy, but what it really is that in the circular economy, you think before you act, where in the linear economy, you produce, you haven't thought it out, and then you get waste. And with that waste, you need to do something. Now, there's a whole economy, a whole industry being built around the linear economy because you need to do something with that material at the end of the day. The beauty of the circular economy is that you don't have a recycling industry. Now, that may sound a bit as a contradiction, but if you think about what you're doing as of day one, there is no waste at the end of the day. There is new, fresh raw material that you can put back into the production cycle. So, key in the circular economy is that first of all, the materials that you use are healthy, that you make sure that you develop an effective take-back system at the end of its cycle. So when the product is used, when our flooring has been on the ground for like 5, 10, 15 or 20 years, we have solutions these days that we can take it back, bring it back to the factory and reuse the material. It's not recycling, it's reusing the material. We're moving to renewable energy with all the plants because we do believe that going forward that is vital. We have good water stewardship and every plant is being measured. All that information is also publicly available. You will see an example later on of what we have achieved within DESSO. And we stand up for social fairness. Those are 5 key elements in the circular economy. What it also means in practice is that we have a detailed roadmap with very clear KPIs of what we want to achieve on an annual basis. So what you want to achieve if you work with thousands of people in plants needs to be very transparent and measurable. Otherwise, you won't get the traction that you're looking for. It's also about making sure that you get the right level of collaboration within the whole supply chain. And there's painful processes in that respect. If your suppliers cannot follow what you want to achieve, you may have to change suppliers. And that is really a process of 2 steps back and 1 step forward in many occasions. Very time consuming, very expensive, because in a number of cases you need to redevelop complete product lines. But if you take it serious, that's where you need to go. What it clearly does is it separates for us the suppliers that want to go with that approach versus the ones that do not want to go with that approach. And there is a clear shift with us as a company and the suppliers. If they don't follow, we can't get to our targets. It's also investment with a long-term view. This is not a quick payback. This can take many years. And also, in this respect, it often means that on the short term, the cost of a product goes up. But you don't get the reward for it in the market, because not every country understands the concept and the fact that it may well be a bit more expensive. That's another challenge you need to work with. If you look at the impact on strategic and operational decision making, then we have a saying within the company which is people, planet, profit, wherein most companies today, I would say more than 90% of the companies operating today, the sequence is profit, people, planet, and it's not people, planet, profit. Profit really comes third in the approach that both Tarkett and DESSO have taken. It's really about people and planet first. For the simple reason that if we don't start to take care of people and planet, in 30 or 40 years, there's a lot less to worry about because it will go wrong. And if business doesn't embrace this concept, the politicians for sure are not going to do it. Whether it's in Australia or in the Netherlands or in France, most politicians are elected for 4 or 5 years. After their second year, what they are worried about is being re-elected. They don't come with policies for the next 20 to 30 years. So it's really a responsibility of companies, but it's also a responsibility of those who buy product to look at certain items in the circular economy approach. If we look at the impact that it has had on Tarkett and on DESSO, then what is mostly impacted is all your R&D work. You need to completely process everything again. On the one hand, you want to move forward with design, which is very important in our business. On the other hand, you don't want to continue to bring product to the market that doesn't meet the objectives of being able to reuse what you're putting on the floor. Supply chain management, I already mentioned that one. A third one that is key is communications, marketing and sales. Selling a new concept needs to be well communicated. You need to charge a premium in most instances, because it is, in the beginning, it is really much more expensive to get that type of product developed and marketed. And a lot of people are not receptive to the idea of paying a bit more extra, because after 10 years, it's such a good story. So that takes a lot of effort to get that right and to get that message across in the right way. One of the programs that we have put on the market for that is leasing of carpet, which for us is a good model if we talk about circular economy, because as a company, we retain the responsibility for the product and the material flow. What it means in practice is that at the end of its life, we take back the product, and part of the deal is that we make sure that the product is being reused. So the mindset needs to change. People need to believe, and I dare to say that everybody who has children should embrace this idea. I have twins, 5 years old. I really wonder what the world looks like the day they are 47. Everybody is good at saying it won't be that bad, you know, everybody's exaggerating. Well, I don't think we are. But the uptake is really slow, and luckily the bigger companies understand that they will need to set the example. If you look at achievements so far, there is a lot of good things achieved. I'm going to mention a few here. I spoke about water before. In 2013, this approach for DESSO only resulted in a 68 million liter saving of fresh water. As I mentioned, we have 25,000 square meters of solar panels on the roof. On the regenerated nylon, we use 50% for all the DESSO commercial carpets. We have a 46% CO2 reduction in 5 years' time. And we have been able to make sure that 80% recycled content is being used in our Soundmaster bagging, which is also quite a large percentage. And you see that this is what we have been able to achieve so far. It's ongoing. This is purely for DESSO. If you look at what we do for Tarkett as a company, you can easily multiply those figures by 10 to 12. That's the amounts you would be looking at. Something I mentioned earlier, the Take Back program, what we launched in 2008. This is really a program to make sure that products that we sell are being recycled according to the cradle-to-cradle principle. What it means is that we will separate the yarn, the face of the carpet tile from the backing, and both will be reused in our process. The good thing is that we are also getting to the point now that whether it's our product or competition's product, we could even do it for a product coming from competition. So we don't make that separation anymore. And another example I really like from practice is the chalk that we use in the backing of our products. What we've been able to achieve is that we now use 20,000 tons of chalk from local water companies. This is chalk that we get from wastewater. It is positively defined recycled content, so the material we use is healthy. That is key in the cradle-to-cradle approach. And this is an example of a part of the system that took us 4 years to get there. The cost was enormous. The risk was huge because we didn't know up front what the outcome would be. But in the end, it succeeded. Normally, we would have bought this material from a mine in France, and we are now using the waste in the right way without having to distract it from the earth. The cradle-to-cradle network that we have is pretty big. What we see in Europe, I'm Dutch, so I have a lot of input in that respect from what we do in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, increasingly, governments, the larger public institutions are using the cradle-to-cradle element if they go to tender these days. That is nice to see that it starts to pay off dividends in a number of countries, certainly in Scandinavia, in the Benelux, in Germany, in Austria, Switzerland. Those are really countries where if you adopt this approach, if you can prove that you do the right thing, you will be shortlisted. Those companies that cannot prove that they do the right things are not even being considered. Is that something that I expect for Australia? Let me say this, not being an Australian, I sincerely hope so. Thank you.